When interviewing longtime sales leader, Salesforce legend, and Bessemer operating partner Tony Rodoni for this week's episode, Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote about success stuck out in my mind. It's a paraphrase. It inferred that successful people last and loved much. They win the respect of all types of people. They have an impact on the world and many, many people in it. Now, you're going to love Tony, especially if you're a sales leader. He talks about the importance of empowering your people, taking the time to document your guiding principles, owning your decisions, and the unfair advantage enjoyed by the talent magnets in our business. Take a listen. Oh yeah, please let us know you're out there. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube, comment, like, and repost on LinkedIn. Let's go. Welcome to Coach2Scale, how modern leaders build coaching cultures. I'm your host, Matt Bonelli. Join me as we build a community of like-minded professionals who share the belief that effective coaching improves the performance of every team member. Our mission is to help leaders become better coaches. The Coach2Scale podcast is sponsored by Coachum, the world's first AI coaching execution platform that leverages evidence-based coaching to increase quota attainment. And with that, let's get started. Today's guest has certainly succeeded and has most certainly impacted way more than just one person. Just go to LinkedIn and look at the comments written about him by others. This guest he's a human Swiss Army knife, leading teams in engineering, marketing, business development, sales, customer success. And he's achieved something close to legend status during his 15 plus years at Salesforce. Currently, he's an operating partner with Bessemer and an advisor to many companies. Tony Rodoni, welcome to Coach2Scale.
It's great to be here, Matt. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, man. Really looking forward to this conversation and sharing it with the world, as they say. Let's get right into it, though. So, Tony, I feel like we've swam in the same pond and lived parallel lives for the last couple of decades, even though we haven't met until recently. But I know that you've heard all of the different myths that are out there. And, some are legitimate, some are just that, myths. What's a myth in this business of coaching and leading salespeople and sales leaders that you believe is either misguided or maybe even complete BS?
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Matt. Boy, it's fun to think of like the myths in our industry. And they're very contextualized, but I'll tell you the one that I see come up the most when I'm working with new sales leaders is that they have to be on every deal. They have to be on every deal. And by the way, there's times when you have to. Don't get me wrong. This myth, there's some truth to every myth, right?
That's right.
Your team only has 2 deals because you're an enterprise team. You're going to be on all of every deal. You have 1 deal left in the quarter. You're going to be on that deal. But when I find sales leaders take that advice and then it's sort of like a little bit of aspirin, they take a whole jar of it and they feel like they've got to be heavily involved in every deal. And I think when you go back to coaching, part of our role in coaching is to be on the deals where it's important and watch reps and give them advice and then coach them. But they don't need to be all in on every deal. I know what it was like for me when I was a rep, when my boss was all in on my deals. I felt like I was neutered. And the bosses that knew when to come in or out and coached me on it and then let me go on parts of the deal, man, I felt empowered. So I think the myth that I have for you is you don't need to be all in on every deal. That's simple. What do you think? Do you buy that in your experience?
Listen, I'm buying it, but I shop at the same store, so it's easy for me to buy into that. But Tony, so let's take this to the furthest extent possible. And I had someone challenge a prospect not too long ago, challenge us recently when it came to the definition of coaching. Our business on the other side is Coachum and technology that does all this. And he said, Matt, what you're talking about is not true coaching, because true coaching, the coach never gives the answer. It's simply the Socratic method, asking questions and never offering up direction or the answer.
Yeah.
And as much as I, reading at night, can buy into the Socratic method, the reality is it just can't happen, right?
That's total. I don't know what, I'm assuming you're on the side that that's BS.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say, yes, like being on every deal, there are cases when you need to be. There are cases when you can be Socratic. I'm a huge fan of uh, a leadership methodology, and part of that is called situational leadership. And situational leadership says for your senior people, you should be asking them questions. You should get them to think. When somebody's very junior and they don't know what to do, asking them questions is a recipe for disaster. So you can be directive, not ask a question, but tell somebody what to do when they don't know how to do it and they haven't done something. If they've done it for a while and you're coaching them, you will then start to ask more questions. And I think any great leader knows how to use that combination Socratic method with a dose of situational leadership. Sometimes we just need to be told what to do.
Yes, we do. And, I think of a story told probably about a year ago now, where a college graduate in the business development SDR ranks.
Yeah.
I was talking to him, he's a friend of my family. And he said, Matt, my boss is great, but I'm struggling. And he's really trying to help. And I said, well, what do you mean you're struggling? What do you mean he's really trying to help? He said, well, at the end of every one of our one-on-ones, he says, how can I help? I said, well, okay, well, what do you say? He's like, Matt, I don't know where I need help. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Like, he keeps asking me but I don't know what. And he just keeps saying I need to, run faster, jump higher, and bang my head against the wall harder. And I'm doing that, but it's not working. And so I think your point there is this person resembles that, which is he doesn't need to be asked where he needs help. He needs to be told where he needs help and guided that way.
For sure. And I mean, part of that is going to be a leader's ability to know when to be directive and when to ask open-ended questions. I worked with a guy at Salesforce named Adam Gilbert, and he was a master at this. He could never answer a question if he wanted to guide you down the path of you figuring it out yourself. But he could also be very directive. And, I'm always reminded that too often we try to be directive, and he taught me to go there when necessary, but don't make that your only instinct. And I think that's a mistake many leaders make, is they get used to telling people what to do. Shoot, you are in a coaching business. How often do I see people say, I coached my reps, we reviewed the deal, and I told them what to do? Like, that's coaching? That's not coaching. Well, I don't know. How would you define coaching as differing from telling somebody what to do?
Yeah. And, David Sandler always said, answer every question with a question. Not everyone though, right? Sometimes you have to be more directive. So
Correct.
Tony, can you talked about a playbook, a system. Can you talk about the importance of leaders and managers having some sort of system, some sort of playbook that they make their own over time?
Yeah. Look, you can't be in sales if you don't have some repeatable thing you do. You can call it a playbook, a process. We can have this debate. One of my former colleagues, who now is the chief sales officer at Lassie, is Kevin Egan. And Kevin Egan likes to say, there's no such thing as a playbook. We have a motion that matches how a customer wants to buy, and we have to respond to the way the customer goes through a process. And what I like about Kevin's point is we think that there's a sales process. And actually, I think maybe this is a myth. There is no sales process. There's a buying process the customer has. And it's our job to optimize how we can help a customer most successfully go through solving a problem that includes a purchase. And with that, I think the answer is yes. It's important for leaders and managers to have a process, a system, or playbook they use. I find it's critical. It has to be dynamic and change, but the basics never go out of style. You described in my intro, I spent a long time at Salesforce, and some of the original, the OG gangster guys that started that sales team took the processes from other companies, guys like Brian Millham and Frank Van Veenendaal and Rob Acker, and they created this playbook that was all about kind of cadence and operational rigor. It was always about getting back to the basics. Whenever we seemed to get off course, it was always the basics of pipeline generation, qualification, just the most important thing that I think we always forget about. And they had two phrases that I'll just never forget that they instituted me. One was almost on every quarterly call or monthly call, they would say, what is the most important fill in the blank month or quarter in the history of the company? And the answer was always this quarter and this month. You know, it's such a reminder that we have to live in the moment and focus on those basics. I want to add one more thing. When I'm interviewing or meeting people who want to be in sales leadership or somebody who's a leader, I ask them, take me through your playbook, your motion. What is it? And they start talking and I stop them and I say, actually, just open up a file or a presentation. You must have written it down. If it matters to you that much, show me. And I mean, it's such a great way to smoke out people who think they know it versus the small percentage of people that have really written it down. And
Oh, that's awesome.
you know, think about it. Like we're in sales, we're good talkers. Often we're better talkers than writers. The ones that are exceptional can also write it down. I've worked with guys like Dan Ross, who has like the 7 summits or 7 skills of successful salespeople and writes it down and focuses on that all the time. There's another colleague of mine that Christina Smears worked with that you interviewed in the past, Mike Wolf. He writes it down and he can get with the team and say, these are the basics. Now I want you to still have your personality around it. And the analogy I've heard used is like, hey, this isn't like McDonald's. I'm not giving you a playbook that you got to follow step by step. And it feels like you're an interchangeable part, but there's a system and I want you to both exercise your personality and the things you're good at the same time of fitting within some guardrails of how we do each skill, task, process in a sales cycle.
And have you ever had people who said, "Oh, I have it. I can't pull it up. I got to find it." Do you ever say, "That's okay. I got time"?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times I say, by the way, it's okay. Most people I ask, this is my strip line. Most people I ask haven't written it down. It sounds like you're not ready to be in management yet or move up. And my advice is I want you to start writing it down and have that point of view. It doesn't need to be written down like it's going to be in book format. It can just be a bunch of bullet points. But when you're the leader, people are going to just ask you, what are your principles on sales management? And if you can't like grab that arrow out of your quiver and shoot it without thinking, that means you're not ready. And writing it down it sounds great in your head, but it doesn't until you write it down. It's just like when we give keynote presentations. It always sounds great when I'm practicing in my head. And then when I walk into the dry run and say it for the first time, it sounds terrible. It's why we have to practice out loud, and writing it down is, I think, an age-old, slightly neglected skill that I would encourage every listener here to get better at.
Yeah, writing it down is the first step, and then saying it out loud. Right, the ears need to hear what the mouth is saying. So you're like, "Ooh, that doesn't sound good coming out of my mouth. Let me change that up a little bit."
I'm a huge fan of Sandler training. I mean, Sandler was the first system that made me go from having no process to processing sales. But what I really think it helped me build was muscle memory to know, oh, when this comes up, what should I do? How do I respond to it? I mean, just like a baseball player at spring training practices grounders or double plays or whatever they practice at spring training, they go through it over and over again. And a system and a playbook and emotion give you the muscle memory to know how to respond and interact with the client.
Yeah, and I know Sandler is a system that's had a positive impact on both of our lives and careers. So we have that in common. You talked a lot. You mentioned a lot of different names, Tony, so far, which I appreciate. Right, you're giving credit to a lot of different folks. Just a few minutes into this conversation, and these are folks that I've heard other people talk about on this show, and these are folks that I would describe as talent magnets. I think you used the phrase in one of our earlier conversations. Can you talk a little bit about why some leaders are talent magnets and the concept of a coaching tree in our business?
Oh, yeah. Isn't it cool? Like a coaching tree of who's worked for whom and who are talent magnets in our industry. So let me preface it with, as I mentioned, some of those people, you said early in my career, I was an engineer. I was a programmer early on. And one of the jokes I like to make about it is if I copied something another programmer did, that's called stealing intellectual property, and you either get fired if it's in your job or arrested if you do it outside your company. In sales, when I copy what somebody else is doing, it's called sharing best practices, and
You're
I can
promoting.
make more money. So part of like recognizing the people that have impacted me or you or all your listeners is I'm I didn't come up with any of these ideas. I'm like a plagiarist galore, um, and trying to learn from who does what and how do I see it work. And what I see about good talent magnets is we know that rapidly growing companies with good leaders, that they're unfair talent magnets for good people because we want to be at a good company. But we also know that the best people that we're recruiting are ambitious, and we have to recognize we're only going to have them a short period of time.
Mm.
And what I find is the most successful talent magnets or recruiters going with that mindset. Look, I might only be your boss for a short snippet of your career. Like I'm here to help you get the next thing you want. And the talent hoarders that bring people in, but they don't necessarily have a coaching tree, keep those people in their org or their team or keep them for as long as possible. So I find what I've learned from leaders that I aspire to be like is they recruit people that are ambitious and know that they're just going to have them for a tour of duty, for lack of a better word. And probably the person that modeled that for me the most is a guy named Robert Zimmerman. He was a VP when I joined Salesforce, and he was my area vice president when I started. And we wouldn't have openings for sales managers, and he always would be recruiting and meeting with people for it. And I'd ask him about it, and he'd be like, "Look, there's always going to be a new opening, blah blah blah." But what I found him doing with that was whenever he had an opening, he had a group of people that were really ambitious that he'd bring in. They probably would only work on his team for a year and move off outside of his org. And what I'm really impressed with Robert is the coaching tree people who run through him are great because he's trying to get them their next job, not in his org. And they're people. I mentioned Adam Gilbert earlier. Robert recruited him to Salesforce. Chris Ciari ran Europe for Salesforce and is now the CEO of a company. Patrick Blair is now a senior executive at Workday that Robert recruited. And we all learned a lot working for him. And what made him a great talent magnet was the fact that he took from the beginning that he is here to export talent as much as he is to import it. And we could take that playbook to the next place we go.
And so, Tony, what do you say to that leader? Let's just say it's a frontline manager, and he or she has a team of 10 people,
Yep.
and their team's full. They have 10 people on the team, and all doing well. And you say, well, how many interviews did you have this week? How many coffees, networking coffees, or whatever?
Yep.
And they say, oh no, I'm not recruiting right now. I'm full. What do you say to that person?
If they've worked, well, I'll tell you, the people who have worked for me that might listen to this podcast are probably chuckling right now, because we rarely have a state where we're full, and it rarely lasts long because of either attrition where somebody leaves the company or moves into another role outside of sales, or promotion where they move up into management or somewhere else. So I have learned to build a model that shows even if you're at or ahead of hiring, you're actually behind, because by the end of the year, you're going to have some attrition. So I will let you I'll try to get you to hire now to get ahead of it, and really get them over. People don't get their first cycle through a fiscal year, but
Right.
This objection you just talked about, once somebody goes through a couple laps of fiscal year, they get how this whole motion works, and that their job is to move people up into management, or maybe there's a strategic account team or something else they're going to move people into. So you always are going to have this flow on teams. And it's one of the ways I like to measure the success of a manager is I'll say, when somebody wants to brag, and I want to hear them brag about how they've done against their number, which is of course the most important thing. What I'll ask isn't, hey, how many people did you promote or move up? My question is, how successful were the people that you promoted into the next jobs they did? I don't want to just measure you on I promoted people because if they failed, you are doing your job at getting them ready. I want to think of this with like an SDR org, for example. I know many first-time SDR managers measure their success by how many people did they promote. I want to ask, like, how successful are the people you promoted? And if they failed, I don't care about how great you did in an SDR job. Of course I do. I'm giving them a little bit of needle there.
Yeah.
But I want them thinking more holistically to that, because that's when somebody becomes a talent magnet. When they say, look, of course I'm going to make you successful in the SDR role, but what I'm really here is to help make you figure out if you want to be in sales. And if you're going to be in sales, give you the tools now so you're ready for it when you're in that next job. And then everybody who moves up into that sales job tells all their friends who are looking at SDR jobs, you should work for Matt Benelli. That guy did X, Y, and Z for me, and that's why I'm in this job. And that becomes the vicious, positive cycle for a talent magnet. Is their alumni are really reinforced that people want to join that team.
And I think of Coach Calipari, and the coach of Kentucky basketball, former coach of Kentucky basketball. I think that was a big part of his shtick, which was, hey, he only expected players to come there for like a year. Most of those players came there for a year, and his thing wasn't just about winning. It was more about how he's going to prepare them for success in the NBA or in life. And I couldn't go too much deeper than that about Coach Calipari, but it seems like he had a similar challenge to a lot of, let's say, SDR managers who have people for, on average, a year. And how do you build them up and make them successful?
Let's play this for anybody here that's in management, though. I mean, it's easy use case with SDRs, and I don't know Coach Calipari, but here's what I would think about an NBA or an NCAA college basketball coach. They get that job and they win, and it's like, okay, good. You had a good team. Can you recruit? Will you be as good when you're in charge of recruiting the team, not just taking a team you inherit? And then they learn how to recruit and build that. And then they actually learn that they build a system that they're applying to, so they know what kind of people they're recruiting for, or they modify their offense or defense depending on what kind of team they have. And I think if I think of the multi-year experience we go through in any type of sales management, it's exactly this progression, which goes back to your first question about a playbook. We have a playbook, but just like Coach Calipari does, it includes recruiting and being a talent magnet. And these are all pieces of that playbook that you don't learn your first fiscal year or your first cycle through in any management job, especially sales management.
Well said. Tony, I'm sure we don't have enough time to talk about all of them, but what's a painful lesson that you learned in this crazy business that shaped who you are and how you approach things even today?
Yeah. Pain. Yeah. Pain is weakness leaving the body, as one of my sons say. Well, let me, as I had a couple things that occurred early in my career. Remember, I was in product R&D, product management, not sales. And one of my peers at a company I worked at really early on, a database company called Informix, was in sales. And she had spent an earlier part of her career in product marketing where I was. And I was asking her the difference between them. And it really taught me this lesson firsthand. I asked her what the difference was. Her name was Kathy Hessian, by the way. And Kathy said, the thing I've learned as I moved to sales is prior to sales, it was all about being right. And now that I'm in sales, it's about winning. And I think of so much of the intellectual time we spend at work, especially when I was in product stuff where there wasn't a deal closing as frequently. It was like, is this architecture right? Is our go-to-market right? Is the industry we picked right? Am I right? So much of this is about, unfortunately, me, and am I right or am I wrong? And Kathy taught me, don't worry about being right or wrong. Let other people get the credit of being right. You want to win. And that got me to loosen up, I'd say, my hey, this is about being right motion. And then I had another really cool enforcement of that lesson, or let me call it a master's in that lesson. I was a VP of marketing a startup, and her CEO, her name was Radha Basu. It was the company was called support.com, and she was an exec from HP. And I was one of the 6 or 8 executive team leaders, executives at the company. And we had a really hairy decision we were making. And I remember we were in the meeting room, and she said, okay, everybody, we're going to vote for this. It doesn't have to be unanimous. And we're going to vote yes or no, but I want to explain what's going to happen because we're going to make a decision. And at the end of making that decision, you've got a few options. And she said, your first option is you can agree with that decision and commit to make it successful. Have you heard this story, this kind of analogy
No.
before?
Well,
Yeah.
no.
He's a second. You can disagree with this decision too, and you can commit to make it successful in the company. But the third one, you can disagree with the decision. And if it's a deal breaker, you can disagree and leave the company. I mean, it'd be hard for any of you to go, but if it's that kind of line we're going over, you can leave. But what you cannot do is disagree with it and fight it every day. Fight it every day and try to hobble the implementation of it. We don't know if it's going to work, but we need to put all our wood behind the arrow to see if it's going to work. If it doesn't work, we should be okay with it, but we don't want to say it failed because we weren't all behind it. And this pain, I mean, I didn't learn a painful lesson where I quit over one of these things. What I learned was to let go of the day-to-day, like, is this thing wrong or right? And I got to make the decision, and I could tell my team, I don't know if it's wrong or right, but what I would like us all to do is execute on it as if we believe it's right. And if it's wrong, we'll change it. It's okay. But I don't want it to be, we failed at executing it because we were fighting it tooth and nail every day. And those leadership lessons, it's about winning and not being right, and accepting a decision that's made and executing on it with all your heart. Those are immortal learning situations for me personally. I don't know. Have you experienced things like that? Does that resonate with you?
Well, first of all, I think she did an awesome upfront contract.
Yeah.
In terms of like, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do, and here's my greatest fear. Yeah, well, I love the analogy, and specifically what I love about it, Tony, is here's what you can't do, because I see this every day. I've been part of it. I've probably been part of I'm sure I've been part of the problem somewhere along the way, but where, you come up with an idea, or the group comes up with an idea, and there's this one proud person who's very talented who wasn't their idea, or for whatever reason, they don't get behind it. And, it scuttles it impedes the ability of the organization to execute. And that's not fair to anybody. And so I really love this story about here's what here's what you can do, and including leave. So I don't want you to, but you can.
Sure.
No's okay. But if you're going to stay, here's how we're going to do things.
I mean, think of how, and I hope the listeners, you're going to go through many things in sales where the comp plan changes. Oh, we just acquired a new product. Is it as good as we hope it is? We're getting different feedback. We changed this channel strategy. It's like, well, okay, it changed. Let's go execute. The rules of the games have changed. If we want to keep playing the game, let's play it to win, and not fight the rules, or at least separate the two. I mean, there's times when I thought, gee, I don't agree with this. Okay, I disagree, but I got to commit to make it successful. And when I disagreed and fought it internally for a while, when there weren't leaders like Rada that gave me that contract, it was just painful. And it just took me a while to be like, hey, if that decision got made, I didn't get to make it. That's life. I'm going to execute as hard as I can. And if it's right, hey, good, we won. If it's wrong, we're going to change it. That's okay.
I've heard a few people call some of the things you say, they call them Tonyisms. And one of the Tonyisms that I remember and I wrote down was the phrase occupational hazards. This is, so I don't know if I have that right, but that's how I recall it. So what is one of those occupational hazards of a frontline manager?
Yeah. Well, so let me explain. Every job, there's some occupational hazard, right? If you're an accountant and you're in the US and it's tax day, you're going to be working a lot before tax day. If you're a salesperson, you have an occupational hazard at the end of quarter or end of month. If you're a salesperson, you have less job security because you're tied to a number than somebody who isn't. And instead of fighting it, no, that's part of the occupational hazard. And you're doing this job because of so many other things that you like that are around it. I Imagine a professional athlete. How much are they traveling? Do they really want to be traveling 50 weeks a year if they're a tennis player or golf player? But if they love the sport or competing enough, they will embrace that occupational hazard rather than fight it. And I think for sales management, the occupational hazard we have is the number one occupational hazard is we are measured on a number and we overfixate on that number and we forget to fixate on all the inputs that drive that output. It's that simple. We get caught up. It's true for reps. It's the number. It's the number. If I hit the number, all the angst and whatever is and stress is off. And I'll just tell you, like, if you hit the number next month or quarter, there's going to be another number, and it's probably going to be bigger. And if you get promoted, it's going to be a bigger and bigger number. And you can't carry that number like Atlas is carrying the world over its shoulder. You have to think about the inputs on that to make it something you could survive this occupational hazard. And that's where we go back to your first question about a sales process or a system. If you have that, you rotate to that as much as possible. And you get really fixated on how good is how much does our sales process match the way our customers want to buy? How good are we executing throughout it? How good are the people on my team? Those are all things we can control, and they help drive the output of the number. And that's a way to turn an occupational hazard of the number into something that we can execute on daily, but doesn't have a daily feedback loop that we get. But luckily we have a monthly or a quarterly or an annual feedback loop. It's much longer when you're in R&D. Can you imagine what it'd be like building a product and taking 5 years to get that feedback, or writing a movie and seeing how long it would take for that movie to actually get produced and make it into the theaters? Or, I'm now an operating partner at Bessemer, and I get to see venture capitalists. You want to look at one of the hardest feedback loops in the industry or the world? Invest in some category or a company and now wait 5 to 10 years to know whether you made the right decision. That's an occupational hazard on that feedback loop that they're going to have. But if they like or love all the other aspects, they embrace that occupational hazard. They don't let it cause stress.
Well, that's a great segue from occupational hazards to what Tony is doing today. You're, like you said, you're an operating partner at Bessemer. You're advisor to a bunch of different companies. What do you love about what you're doing, and what drew you there based on where you came from in your career?
Oh, how fun. I've got to work with a lot of great leaders and have taught me over time to really understand your values. And I'm going to share with you my values because my values will answer this, because it's like a direct hit at the work I'm doing with Bessemer. And it's a neat exercise if somebody hasn't gone through and figured out their values. My values, first, curiosity. I love learning new things, though I'd say my assistant for many years, Michelle Dalby, who I just adore, she would add a corollary to this and say, Tony is grumpy while he's learning new things, and he's a little happier at the end of learning new things. But curiosity and like learning a new market, a new company, a new industry. I like that process, and especially the latter half as I get some clarity on it. My second one is impact. The things I work on, I want to help make an impact. And the third is relationships. Probably one reason I ended up in sales rather than being an engineer my whole career is I like working with people and meeting new people and building relationships. So this intersection of I like learning new things, making an impact, and dealing with new people really fits in to what happens when you're working with a venture firm and they have a couple hundred portfolio companies, and I get to learn new technologies, new businesses, how investing works. I mean, you do that as an operator a little bit, but man, the longer you're an operator, your head is your head is in the business, not looking at all the other businesses. And shoot, it's scratching my itch of getting to meet and work with new people, both inside Bessemer and in their portfolio. Just inside Bessemer, I'm working with the person who runs all the operating advisors and their platform team named Carolina Kung. She's awesome. The CMO at Bessemer used to be at LinkedIn. Her name is Shannon Brayton. I just learned a ton about how venture works and how to support companies from those two, along with the investors there like Brian Feinstein and Mary D'Onofrio and a few others. And then just numerous entrepreneurs, man. It's almost scratching the itch to go to a startup without having to be at a startup.
That's awesome. And I got to say, this whole process of the values, something that, I've been privy to for many years, and we train that. We don't focus on it as much as we should, but through interviewing some folks that you've worked with, a couple of different folks. Well, I'll just say Christina and David, Christina Smith, David Priemer, they both proactively talked about their values, which had me go and reconsider what mine were. And so, and the way I did it is because I was going to introduce this concept to my son, who was looking for his first role coming out of school in sales. So mine were same three as yours, and transparency was the fourth one. And so like very, very similar. And I had my son do the same thing in terms of going through the interview process. And it was a really cool conversation from a father to a son, from a coaching perspective. And, he'll have that for the rest of his life. But the feedback was the people with whom he interviewed were, super impressed that a young person of his age, kind of had thought that through. So circuitously, I have to, give you and your colleagues credit for that, because you're the one who put that bug into my ear and made it bite most recently.
Oh, listen, hey, I said at the beginning, I plagiarized this from others, and as a part of a leadership program I went through, we had to do it. And kind of what I learned is a company has values, right? We have individual values, and when things are going really well, I don't mean just getting promoted all the time or whatever, but when a job is clicking, your values and the company values have a lot of interlock. And having a lot of great executives work for me, like Christina, like David Priemer, when they're not firing on all cylinders, there's usually a disconnect between their personal values and the company values. And it may not be permanent, but it may be temporary. But talking about that really helps unlock, well, how big of an issue is this? And can we solve it? And it was a wonderful experience I had with David Priemer. He was a sales leader. He was a fantastic sales leader. I have David Priemer's book on my desk. We want to talk about writing it down.
Right there. There it is, right there. I got it too.
Priemer is a stud. He wrote it down. And it probably comes from his background outside of sales. But
research.
When he was looking at what he wanted to do next, and we were talking about his values, and that led him into becoming a writer on go-to-market and sales topics. And we didn't know what job that was going to play itself into. And I don't know, I'm so happy for people like David, but it really comes from being able to have a values-based discussion and not a, hey, dude, I need you for this quarter to keep this job, to hit this number, to make this quota, to pay this mortgage. Those will all happen in the long run anyway. Finding out what motivates somebody to tick. If when you get everybody firing on that, you'll end up with a world-class leader and trainer like Dave.
And for everybody out there, David Priemer was a prior guest on the show. He's the author of the book, The Sales Leader They Need. And Tony here wrote the foreword for that book. We'll put the link in the show notes, but excellent book with an excellent foreword. Check it out. So Tony, Coach2Scale, that's the name of this show. My goal is to bring on guests that have had interesting experiences, that are willing to share that with others. And usually people who care about coaching and developing people had that behavior modeled for them. So my question to you is this: who is someone in your life whose coaching had a positive influence on who you are today?
Oh boy. Right. It's interesting. I never had a permanent coach. I would say all these people don't know that they were all my coaches helping me out all the time. I probably had the biggest coaching staff just by asking people questions and asking for help along the way. And can I give two examples? I'll describe the people, but I want to describe the situation, because the situation matters. As much as it's a coach, it's how you respond to it. And one is a guy I worked for 14 of my 16 years at Salesforce, named Brian Millham. He's now the COO at Salesforce. But back at the time, I was like a junior sales manager, and he was my boss, and he was not the COO. And he was asking me for an update, and we were going through a QBR, and I was taking him through something, and I think we were going through our team. And I made a probably not the most professional comment that was a little snarky. And I just said, well, the team I have at this period is pretty poor. It was what I said was worse than that. And he could have just kind of lit back into me on something, but he gave me, instead of lighting back into me and just hammering me for kind of saying it with the wrong style, he kind of diffused it and said, well, we've got you here and it's your job to make them better. It's your job to make them better. And I kind of went, and we had a discussion later on where he was like, rightfully, not in the big room, but in a one-on-one, was like, you came in a little too hot on that for our style, which I modeled that way, learning too, like, don't light people up in a big public spot when they screw up. But this concept of like our job, I mean, isn't this leadership is, can we make people around us better? And that percolated for, years. It still percolates in me on a kind of a one-off thing. He was my boss at the time, but that became like a big North Star that comes through, a side comment is he gave me lots of other specific coaching, but that one is just a good example of
Awesome.
how much it stuck. And I want to give another one that I had, because I was losing a lot of sleep at one period in my career, because that same boss asked me to take on something else in the company. And he asked me to think about it. And I didn't, my first reaction was negative. Like, I don't want to do that. That's hard. It may not succeed. There's like, everything is so perfect right now. You know this, right?
Yeah.
And part of what I was junior enough at the time to not know that, the only time people give you stuff, they give you stuff that's broken. Nobody gives you something that's working. That job is filled right now. But I was not wanting to do it. I wasn't displaying exceptional leadership skills. And I was at lunch with a coworker named Mike Rosenbaum. And Mike is the CEO of his SaaS company now. Mike probably doesn't remember this conversation at all, but I was saying, I'm really struggling. Brian's asking me, and he keeps asking me, and I keep saying no, and he keeps asking me again. And Mike just laughed and leaned back and he said, Tony, you've been voluntold. Not volunteered, voluntold. Like, you dummy.
It's not a question.
You just have to say yes and do it. And like, suck it up and get over it. Yeah. And I'm probably exaggerating this whole story a little bit for the sake of the theater of your podcast. But I mean, it was like instant clarity. I went home and I'm like, oh, of course I'm going to do this. And of course it's going to be fine. And you know what? Not only did I do it, not only was it more than fine, but that it triggered another mindset that from then on, whether it was Brian or any other boss I had, it was like, my job is to do whatever you need me to do. And I mean, here's some stuff I'd like to do, but if you need stuff, look, I'm here to make you successful. What position you want me to play on? I'm all in. And that, I don't remember how long that lasted. That 2 weeks or 4 days of angst or whatever it was, it changed everything afterwards on my mindset on new opportunities.
I love both of those stories. They all resonate, but the second one resonates a lot because, yeah, you're handed the opportunity for something that's broken. And then the whole voluntold, I had a similar experience, and my mentor said, something along the lines of, you're a victim of your success. Yeah. And that I got a kick out of that. And then my wife said, she said, you realize this isn't a question, right? Like this isn't, they're being nice. They're asking you, but yeah, you're being voluntold is the better way to put it.
Kind of, but a dummy. And let me just say, not as professionally mature as I needed to be at the time, but in my self-defense, you go through these experiences a little bit. I'd say you do sales coaching. How do we get to be good salespeople? Because we lose deals, and however way we lost it, we're never going to lose again. And the same, I hope if we're going to be successful, at least we're not going to lose that way again. And the same, right. I think a little bit career-wise, you've got to learn to embrace these things when they come, and embrace it just like I learned to embrace a gigantic number when I'm not on every deal. And that's just another occupational hazard.
All right. Well, on the topic of coaching, I like to ask all the guests this question. Who is your favorite coach? And when I say that, I'm thinking, a name that maybe a lot of people might
Yeah.
know.
It's funny. A lot of people might know. I mean, a lot of uh, men know John Wooden, the famous basketball coach from UCLA, who because they know him because he wrote it down in something called the Pyramid of Success. But I use that, but I'm not going to use it because I want to use one that people won't know, but I want to reinforce a little bit why. Or if you know, you'll be like, yep, I get it. There is a guy that is the rugby coach at UC Berkeley called Jack Clark.
Okay.
I never heard of him before, 15 years ago or so. The guy has won 23 national championships at a sport that's not, premier in the US. He won 12 in a row at one period. I think 5 in a row, 2 other times. And I saw him speak. And at the time, I didn't know it, but like 3 alumni from his team were on my team at Salesforce. And this guy just has a few leadership maxims that I think are awesome. And I'll try to paraphrase a couple, but look up Jack Clark, UC Berkeley leadership maxim or something. His first one is that he says to players is you have to earn everything. And I think the phrasing is you're entitled to nothing and grateful for everything. Now think about that in sales. Like I have salespeople like, oh, the leads dried up. It's like, well, we were grateful when they came and we weren't entitled to them. So move on. And there's 2 other things I really liked that he had. One was his focus on constant performance improvement. He had a way of saying, and I think this is really true of athletes. If you're not getting better right now, if you're not getting better today, we are getting worse because our competitors are all getting better. And I think that, I love I'm entitled to nothing and grateful for everything. And I have to get better every day. And another thing he did with his players was saying, seniority doesn't matter. What I care about is who's the best. But here's how so if you're a senior, you want to be the captain. It's not because you're a senior. I want it to be the best leader. And his definition of the best leader is those that make the team around them better. Those players that make the team around them better. And that doesn't matter whether they're a freshman or a senior. And then I think there's another one on toughness. You'd have to ask, there's a South African American named Rickus Pretorius that is at Service Titan now. It's a Bessemer company that played for Jack Clark. His boss, Ross Beastman, played for Jack Clark. Getting one of those 2 on this to talk about just Jack Clark and what they learned. I think Jack is a leadership coach to Ross at Service Titan, where he's operationalizing this in his role. There's another U.S. national rugby player, Sean Paga, who's in tech. Last time I worked with him, he was at MuleSoft, but I think he's at Alexi, that also played. And you just kind of see this mentality that I think really matches how growth I see in salespeople. And it's not just men because they played rugby. These maxims, I think, are just really good life lessons that Jack Clark teaches people for life while they're playing rugby on his team.
That's awesome. Love the rugby reference too. Jack Clark. And I don't know the name, but I'm going to look it up, which is feeds my curiosity.
He's at the end of his career, I believe now. Trust me, I don't follow Cal rugby, but he had opportunities to be professional coaches and coaching country teams. He's like, nope, I have found the occupational hazard that I want. And it, just those lessons, I would post what I heard from him in his talk in like a Slack-like tool in Salesforce, and multiple years of people that played rugby for that guy or against his teams would chime in on those 4 or 5 maxims was how he led it from their first year to their 4th year.
Well, that goes back to Talent Magnet and Coaching Tree, and back in. A lot of people remember what they learned under Coach Clark, which is really, really cool. So, Tony, I wasn't going to ask this question, but I saw something you posted, probably about a week ago now. I think when Bessemer put out their 2024 state of AI or something like that, and it had all those spicy takes about what's out there for AI and what's going to drive entrepreneurship in the near term. And I want to connect the dots a little bit with what we're doing in sales and sales coaching. I think it was, well, I'm not going to think, I'm going to look. Kareem Lakhani is a professor at Harvard Business School. He said, AI won't replace humans, but human with AI will replace humans without AI. A lot of sales people, a lot of sales leaders are fearful, like, oh, is AI going to take my job? Uh,
Yeah.
What is, where do you see in the next 5 years, like kind of shorter term, next
Yeah.
5 years, what is the role of AI when it comes to sales in our noble profession?
I mean, I love the quote you used. AI is changing jobs and it's changing the way we'll interact with our clients. And I'd say the crystal ball is cloudy, no pun intended, over the short run. Think about the change in the internet when you and I were early in our careers, in 96 when the internet came on, or Netscape browsers. And how is the internet going to change things? And the players that were involved. Yeah. All we do is put up our brochures online. There wasn't commerce yet. There wasn't software. I think AI is going to go through, and yet we look back and it's like, oh my God, it changed everything. So I think while it's happening, it's not going to feel like everything is changing, just like the internet didn't feel like it was changing dramatically, except for individual spikes. But I would say AI is first of all, it's going to change the way people buy. So if we're selling and we match to the way they buy, the way we sell is going to have to change. And it's going to make us better, more efficient. And in the worst case, there might need to be fewer of us. But the internet, think of what the internet did. Early in my career, we controlled all information on B2B products and sales. So customers had to engage with us very early in the cycle, even if they didn't want to learn about our product and service. And think
Mhm.
about how much that dynamic has just changed in the last 20 years
Yeah.
because of the internet and the research people can do. By the time they are looking at any of our B2B software products, they're already a third, 40%, halfway through the sales cycle. They've been
Yeah.
on Gartner and G2 Crowd, and sales has had a sea change from the IBM and Xerox B2B tech sales of 1985 until now. And I think we're going to see a similar sea change. I think it's going to first play out in the intersection of the tools we use to make us more efficient and the tools our customers use
Mm.
to make the buying process easier and how we intersect with them. So, there are more automated prospecting tools now and automated scoring systems and next best action tools and automated forecasting tools and things that are going to read your email and your notes and update your CRM tool. Like we spent a generation hitting people over the head with a hammer to update their CRM tool. Guilty as charged, by the way. And if these AI tools work correctly, they are going to be able to update almost all of it and then let us do the override on what pieces we want to update. And the good part is the machine that does it isn't going to hedge and have a hope I get this deal gets in. It's going to say, there was this communication that was a positive indicator with the CEO or not, versus us when we tell our bosses, well, we had this communication, and I might spin it to be a little more positive because I'm a hopeful person, or maybe I'm a negative person. I spin it to be the other way. The tool has no feelings, and yeah, it may make some of the drudgery part of our job easier and better, and be a better truth teller. How it plays out, who the winners and losers are. Oh God, I have no chance. I like to ask Jeeves and Alta Vista and all these other tools in 96. What I would say for sellers and people in sales is you need to start using these products. Just like I would think in 96 or 2000s, like we better start using the internet, like buy stuff online, have a point of view, learn how these tools work. Otherwise, you don't want to be the last person standing that's selling the old way, rather than somebody who's embracing some of these new technologies, new tools, and more importantly, the new ways customers are going to buy.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, and really great advice. What the last question I was going to ask is, what advice do you have for those that are, maybe just getting started in the business? And it sounds like you just gave it, no?
Um, yeah, I mean, embrace these tools, be an early adopter.
I really don't.
Don't be the laggard in this market. You won't be a winner if you're a laggard.
You won't be a winner if you're a laggard. Well, Tony, again, great spot to leave it. We covered a lot of ground today. We talked about AI and where that's going for the sales profession. We talked about the importance of having a system, how to deal with occupational hazards, and the coaching tree and the power of being a talent magnet. I really appreciate the time you invested with me and with our listeners today.
Thanks for having me, Matt. It's really been a pleasure getting to know you in a kindred spirit in all things Sandler as well. I love you, man.
Thanks a lot, Tony. And for all of you out there watching and listening, thanks for doing that. We're excited to bring content like this and interesting guests like Tony to you. If you like it, hit the like button, but most importantly, engage. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you'd like to see more of. Tell us specific people you'd like to hear from. We'll do our best to get them on the show. We want to bring guests and content to you that's interesting and that's actionable. But until next time, coach them if you want to keep them. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Coach2Scale, How Modern Leaders Build Coaching Cultures. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at coachem.io. That's COACHEM.io. And follow us on Twitter at CoachemNow. See you all next week. Thanks for joining. And remember, coach them if you want to keep them.